on time here, and I'm just going to dive right in and we'll just go with it. So hello and welcome everybody to the webinar today. My name is Carrie Berger, and I'm the coordinator for the Northwest Fire Science Consortium. For those of you not familiar with the consortium, we are one of 15 fire science exchange networks across the United States that are funded by the Joint Fire Science Program. So part of our mission here in the Northwest is to disseminate regionally relevant information to our stakeholders in Oregon and in Washington. So we try to do this by offering a diversity of opportunities for people to participate in, and hosting webinars is just one way we accomplish that. So I encourage you to visit our website to learn more about the consortium and to sign up for a monthly newsletter if you're not already on that list. Our website information can be found in the chat box. And let me just get this started so people know that the webinar has started. There we go. So to avoid any noise interference, I have muted your audio. So if you have a question, please go ahead and type that into the chat box. Also, I will be recording the webinar and will archive it on our website and YouTube channel. In fact, I record all our webinars and have a large archive of webinars and videos just waiting to be watched. So go ahead and write down those web addresses that are listed there for you in the chat box. So I'd like to welcome back Josh Clark. Last year around this time, Josh gave a webinar on the outlook for the 2017 fire season. So Josh is part of the Northwest Fire Science Consortium Advisory Board, and we certainly appreciate his participation in that group. But in addition to volunteering on advisory boards, and I'm sure many other things, Josh is the meteorologist for the Washington DNR. He specializes in fire weather and applications of weather in forecasting fire danger, smoke impacts, and forest health. He manages the state's remote weather station network and is an incident meteorologist. So at this point, I'm going to switch to your PowerPoint, Josh. There you go. I'm going to give you the controls. And so go ahead whenever you're ready.
All right, thanks. And, thank you, Carrie, especially for bearing with me to the very last minute. Turns out I was on the short list to give a presentation to a Teamsters Union about the same outlook after our assistant division manager for fire operations had to cancel. So I apologize for running late. Anyway, so, we give this every year. It's Pacific Northwest Fire Season Outlook, and a few of us, the weather program leaders, fire weather program leaders from the National Weather Service offices, Medford, Pendleton, Spokane, Portland, Seattle, and Boise, and then John Stoltenberger at the GAC. We get together and kind of talk about what the season is going to look like at the incident management team and at the incident management team meeting. And so this is kind of an overview of what we're expecting regarding fire season. And just going to go ahead and get into, this is what we're going to be talking about today. This is basically we introduce what we're expecting by looking at first, what do we consider and when we're making an assessment of what the next fire season will look like. We'll define a normal fire season, and forgive me, Oregon, but this is mostly going to be centered on Washington in regards to the fire season portion, the normal fire season. The forecast and everything will be for the entire PNW. We'll take a look at preseason conditions where we've been, and then we're going to look at summer outlook, where we're headed. And then finally, we'll conclude with kind of the general consensus of thought regarding what this coming fire season will look like. So this is my background here. In case you don't know me or we haven't interacted yet, this is my third season with DNR. Previous to this, I was at Mesa West, the Center for Atmospheric Research, and then did my internship under the Rocky Mountain Coordination Center, Predictive Services and Fire Meteorology. And then before all that, I was in the Air Force in Afghanistan and Alaska. In my current position, I'm the Weather and RAWS Program Manager, provide decision support to our state executives. This can be Governor's Office, Emergency Management, Ecology occasionally, Fish and Wildlife, and DNR. manage the state's RAWS network. I'm very proud to say that we have the 4th largest network in the U.S. behind California, Texas, and North Carolina. We have 32 stations located in beautiful places across Washington, suitable for fire weather, fire danger. Do a little bit of research and develop some tools on lightning ignition efficiency and RAWS site suitability. How do we define where RAWS should be located? I'm giving a presentation here next week at the AMS conference and at the Fire Continuum conference in Missoula thereafter. I also make daily smoke management decisions for Washington silvicultural burners. I'm an incident meteorologist, and my academic background is at Northern Colorado and Idaho. So that's a little bit about me. Getting into the 6 external drivers for fire season activity. So these are kind of the 6 things that I'm looking at, especially when I'm trying to make a forecast as to what is going to happen in the coming fire season. So where did we end up last year in regards to our fuels, vegetation on the landscape? What was the moisture content when those fuels kind of bottomed out and went dormant? And then we're taking a look at, there we go. October to May rainfall, of course, when we get that deep stratus layer over the western portion of Washington and Oregon, that actually does a world of wonder for our vegetation come summer, right? It keeps things lush and green. State of snowpack and the timing of the subsequent runoff. So how much snow do we get in our mountainous basins, and when does that start melting, right? If it melts too early, we may go into fire season a lot quicker. Our fuel moistures may be a lot less going into June, July, August. If it sticks around, right, we may see a delay in fire season or a less severe fire season. Of course, right, when we just think back to 2017 and how susceptible our fuels became so quickly to summer weather conditions, right? Weather changes on very dynamic timescales, and we saw last year with that dominant upper level ridge that we ended up experiencing record temperatures through July and August that drove us into a pretty healthy, I'd say, fire season for the remainder of the period. And then, of course, no fire season would be complete without lightning-caused and human-caused ignitions, right? Those 2 things, without any ignition source, we simply don't have fire. There's probably some ecologists on here that can correct me when I'm wrong, fire ecologists especially, but I'm going to talk about fire regimes for a second, and everybody cringed at the fact that a meteorologist is going to talk about fire regimes, but I'm going to try. What I'm getting at is that, these fire regimes are driven by fuel accumulation, the moisture content of said fuels, and ignition sources, right? And every place on the landscape has a fire regime associated with it, right? All these places have naturally experienced fire long before we came and displaced fire or excluded fire. So, when we talk about fire regimes, this is kind of its definition, the pattern of naturally occurring fires in like fuels and climate. Land fire classifies these in groups 1 through 5, and you can see the typical frequency and severity, and then the description of severity associated with those type of fires, type of fire regimes. So, if we're looking at Western Washington, what we expect is kind of stand replacing fires maybe every 200 years, right? That would be in our naturally occurring fires. Of course, things have been altered dramatically since we've started to settle in Western Washington. And then, if you look over at the east side, our fire interval is a lot more frequent, and we're looking at low to mixed severity for a lot of places. So, I say again that human-caused ignitions have modified the majority of our fire regime factors, right? The frequency at which fire occurs, the seasonality at which we get fires. Sometimes we get fires, escape debris burns in February, March, and April that are pretty significant, over 40 acres. The location of fires, right? More people are moving into the wildland-urban interface, so we're seeing places that previously did not see a lot of fire from lightning starting to experience a lot more fire. And for us, that's about 70% of our ignitions. It's kind of wild when you think Washington, especially, we don't get the significant amount of lightning that, say, Rocky Mountain area would get. So this is the part exclusively about Washington, and I'm so sorry I just didn't have time to run all these statistics through like MATLAB and make a pretty chart. But yeah, kind of the same rules apply. In Washington, normal for us is July through September. That's kind of our critical period. Human ignitions start to peak on July 4th. If you take a look at this, average number of all fires per day from Karen Short's FPA FOD, that fire occurrence database. You can see that per day we're staying around 5, under 10 fires per day, and then right at July 4th, right, 40, 41 fires on average over the period of record for fire occurrence for all fires in Washington. So, that kind of sets the tone for especially the DNR, right? July 4th onward, you're not allowed to take vacation. We have every rotor, every fixed wing on standby. All of our fire crews are hired, trained, and ready. We're ready to go. And come July 21st through about August 21st, we enter that climatological window for frequent lightning occurrence. Temperatures get really hot. We get, a little bit of moisture influx, and we get some good thunderstorms, especially over the basin and the Palouse, in the blues that drop frequent lightning. Now, lightning bust for us is maybe several hundred lightning strikes. A lightning bust for Rocky Mountain, still, the scale is a lot different. It's not uncommon for that 5-state area to experience 22, 35,000 lightning strikes. But the combination of lightning and human ignitions really makes it to where July 21st through that end of August period is when we expect our fire season to be most severe, and we do go above the 90th percentile several times in fire occurrence during that period. When we talk about extreme weather events, these are basically the same for both states, and that is thermal troughs. So when we get easterly wind events, and those are, again, as meteorologists, we say easterly wind events. We only care about where the wind's coming from, not where it's going. So the winds are coming from the east over the mountains, through the mountain passes, and we get 15 to 20% RH over on this side, and temperatures 85 to 95 with a good warm breeze. That typically brings about a large western Washington, Western Oregon fire. Still other phenomena like ridge breakdowns. We typically get frequent lightning or dry cold fronts, which kind of exacerbate the valley flows that we see that are typical of like the Methow or Lake Chelan or Kittitas Valley or the Gorge, right? So these things end up resulting in wind-driven range fires, blow-up type fires like Chelan or Okanagan or 30-mile, and then frequent lightning type ignitions. I put this slide up here because I want you all to know when we're talking about what a normal fire season is, we can talk about it in a lot of different ways. As I expressed to the Teamsters, right, as the public, as them being the general public, they may only care about how much we spend on fires, right? Because that's their bottom dollar. I mean, they're paying for the fires basically as a taxpayer. So, they may consider a normal fire season to be one where we only spend X amount of money. A manager may look at it that way. Or, it differs by agency. Whether or not you're allocating resources for initial or extended attack primarily. If you're working at the GAC versus working on initial attack, you're going to be looking at more extended range events. So, I argue that acreage burned is kind of a poor descriptor, and especially kind of when they're used together. I prefer fire occurrence, actual, new fires on the landscape. For Washington, that's like 1,400 fires. And just for the gee whiz, I guess the acres burned is about 300,000. So, and I also use new fire occurrence because DNR's mission is 95% of all fires contained under 10 acres or less. And right, whether or not we want to argue if that's the appropriate mission to have, you can take that up, I guess, with the new strategic plan that we're writing. But that's our current mission is we're concerned about new initial attack. DNR is heavily geared towards, our rotors are all initial attack type rotors. Our engines are built for initial attack. So that's what I try to stick to. And I think a lot of meteorologists and fire behavior analysts and such, when they talk about below average, above average fire seasons in Washington and Oregon, they're talking about it in terms of fire occurrence as well. All right, so that's a lot of background, and we're going to look at a lot of pretty maps now. So it's just we're coasting now. But so I put up here, this is drought severity, October 2016 versus October 2017. So this is on the left was what we were going into for 2017, and over on the right is what we're going into this year. And for the most part, in 2017, we did have, or going into 2017, we did have some drought concerns for Eastern Oregon, but the predominant drought concerns were, of course, in California, and we saw, them have pretty severe fire seasons again during that period, or during the 2017 season. This year, our fuels ended up in this kind of abnormally dry to moderate drought scenario. For Washington, this is worse than what we were looking like before the 2017 season. For Oregon, it's actually better. And, largely this was due to that stagnant upper level high pressure regime that just kind of stood in place, for seemingly like a month or a month and a half, that brought about those record temperatures and low RHs that put us into these conditions. When we look back at the mean daily temperature anomalies for the last 7 months, we can see that by and large, with the exception of maybe like the Olympic Peninsula or the upslope portions of that Selkirk Range, kind of Ferry, Stevens, and Pend Oreille County, that things have been above normal. Are they significantly above normal? Well, I don't tend to think that it's that severely above normal, right? 1.5 to 2 degrees above normal since October. It is warm, but it's not like catastrophic. The Cascades have been warmer, and we saw that when you consider if you're a skier, right, we didn't get a lot of snowpack until about February. So, a lot of that was due to an unusually warm, an unusually warm December through January period. And then, if we lump Idaho into the GAC just for the fun of it, 2 to 3 degrees above normal for much of central Idaho there. When we look at precipitation, Washington sits really nice, 140% of normal since the water year began on October 1st. Oregon, however, is only about 60 to 90% of normal. And, when we take a look back at kind of the climatological rankings, we're off almost 3 inches there, and it's the driest it's been in Oregon since 2014. And think about some of the fire seasons that we've had in Oregon since 2014, right? They've been pretty severe or slightly above average, and we're talking going into this coming season as being even more dry than those years. And then, I got kind of pigeonholed here about talking about Yakima. I think it's because the incident management team meeting was in Yakima, and all the news was there from Yakima, and they wanted to know about Yakima. So when you do take a look at the graphics, there is an indication that Yakima area, that valley, and then a lot of the kind of the lee slope areas of the Cascades are in their driest 10% of all years on record since 1895. Is that, is that like, it's not as like substantial, right, as saying like the entirety of Oregon is below average in precipitation. But, when we got to point fingers at some place in Washington, that's the place I would look at. It would be that Yakima Valley area. Snowpack on the left is from leading up into 2017 season. Snowpack on the right is as of today, as of Monday, I think. And, what I wanted to show is that going into last year, we were looking really great in snowpack, especially for the entire Pacific Northwest. This year, Washington still looks pretty good. Northern Rockies, looks great. The rest of the U.S., the western states, look terrible in terms of snowpack, especially, well, I shouldn't say especially, the majority, Great Basin, Oregon, Colorado, those places are all in kind of terrible shape for snowpack. And think about just for a second, what that looks like for us in terms of like resource implications, right? Those places all enter fire season before us, right? Those places are going to order resources before us. So when we get into fire season, as Northern Rockies, kind of Idaho Panhandle, Montana, Washington, and maybe even Oregon, we're going to be competing nationally for resources that are what I feel will be exhausted or hard to come by, right? And that's going to set a very early tone for our fire season, resources being especially scarce when they normally wouldn't be. This is soil moistures, and I just kind of throw this graphic up here to get kind of a read on. We don't have, I guess, the best tools to look at fuel moistures outside of fire season, right? When the raw stations come online and we start putting in daily observations, we get a lot better intel on fuels conditions. But, I just kind of look at soil moistures to see how are they trending on a broader scale. And it looks like for the majority of Washington, things are in those higher percentiles. And, of course, right there in that central Oregon area, we're in the bottom 30% of calculated soil moistures. And then, when we look at the desert Southwest, they're in kind of record or near record low soil moistures for those areas. So when we consider all these things, temperature, precip, snowpack, soil moisture, whatever, we get kind of a sense of what to expect in regards to drought and forecasted drought. And this is the Drought Monitor as of today, and it's showing that the eastern two-thirds of Oregon are in these kind of abnormally dry conditions, and that even expands, down into kind of the southern Cascades there of Oregon, and then of course that Four Corners area of Utah, Colorado, and the two Southwest states is an exceptional drought, and that's where the majority of our fire concerns are going to lie. I think this year is in the Great Basin and Desert Southwest. I just put up some snapshots from local papers for Oregon, just, noting that Klamath and Grant County having been, I guess, awarded some relief money for drought issues. So this is kind of a recognized saying that it's not just a map, right? It's actually occurring on the ground, that the eastern two-thirds of Oregon are under these drought type conditions. And then here is, this is fuels. This is kind of our best look at energy release component values this time of year. And if you're not familiar with energy release component, it's just a number that is related to the available energy and BTUs within the flaming front of the fire. So it's kind of like fire line intensity in a way. It takes into account live and dead fuels. It's a build-up type index, so it's kind of a cumulative 7-day look at what fuels conditions look like. The higher the value, the more severe you would expect fire intensity to be. So, and it's kind of relative in the sense that, like, if you have an ERC of 12 and then you get an ERC of 24, well, then that means you can expect double the intensity of a fire starting in an area that is 24. So, I just wanted to point out that, and this is to be expected. We've had a lot of sunny days in the last 7 days or so. But we're looking at kind of above normal conditions for energy release component. But, when you look at kind of the percentile values, it's not terribly significant, around the 55th, 65th percentile. All right, so this is the long range magic 8-ball, folks, the climate prediction. I like to think that meteorologists, we do a fantastic job in the 3 to 5, 7-day window. These folks, God bless them, are out looking at, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months out and trying to make a prediction. And what they're looking at in terms of El Nino or La Nina is sea surface temperature anomalies. And especially over this area, I think it's called Sector 3.4, and it's just an area along the equator that has been correlated to affecting weather here in the United States or in North America. So when we say El Nino, La Nina, INSO neutral, what do we mean? We mean if we see a temperature anomaly, we're looking at the left graphic, if we see a temperature anomaly of 0.5 degrees Celsius or higher, that's seemingly a good indicator of El Nino. When it's negative 0.5 degrees Celsius or lower, that's a better indicator of La Nina. And when it's kind of in that range in between, those would be INSO neutral type conditions. Over on the right here is the model predictions of INSO from this past month. And the black line at the beginning of the graphic is what's been observed. And these lines are all plumes of models. This is the plume of models, all the different models that are used to forecast INSO. So there's the Japanese Meteorological Agency, Euro, UK, and even some academic institutions like FSU, UCLA, and Colorado State. And largely, take a look at the dynamic average, which is the red line, and you can see that within the next several months, probably by the end of summer, we're expecting a return to INSO neutral conditions where INSO doesn't really affect our weather one way or the other. When we get towards fall, we're expecting a higher chance of El Nino type conditions. And what are the implications of those type of things on Pacific Northwest weather? Well, we know that INSO has no direct impact on summer weather, temperature, and precipitation, right? It's only indirect. It's only really affects us in the winter period. And of course, right, if we have warmer temperatures in the winter, we expect less snowpack, and we might have a more severe fire season in the summer. But INSO has not been correlated with temperature and precip during the summer months. Instead, we're looking at that kind of late winter, early spring period. And here are two scenarios from NOAA, the Climate Prediction Center, El Nino on top, La Nina on bottom. And kind of the track that the jet streams take, really affects what weather that we get. So in an El Nino type event, we have warmer temperatures, we get more precipitation as rain, and less overall precipitation. When we're in the La Nina type event, it's colder. Skiers rejoice. We get more precip falling as snow. We end up getting more snowpack in our mountainous basins, and overall more precip accumulation. I'm trying to press the button. Okay, so when we think about what we just said, right, returning to INSO neutral conditions, and then possibly going into El Nino type event on the back end of this in the coming winter, and then looking at some of the climate models regarding temperature, precip, relative humidity, and stuff. The Climate Prediction Center makes these outlooks: a 1 month outlook and then the 3 month outlook on the right. And what they're indicating is that we will have the potential about 40 to 60% chance of seeing above average temperatures for the next month, and only about a 33 to 50% chance of it seeing above average temperatures for the next 3 months. However, it does seem right that we're going to see some above average temperatures during the 3 month window. And when we look at precipitation, they're actually forecasting below average precipitation for the 1 month window and below average precip for the 3 month window as well. So, you put those two things together, and what do you get? Well, you get persisting drought, especially in Oregon where it's already dry, and you get further drought development in Oregon in areas adjacent to where that drought is currently happening. It's probably, I would imagine that at some point in the summer, Washington goes into these abnormally dry conditions. It's kind of a seasonal thing. But for the most part, we'd be focused on kind of this short-lived drought that would be occurring in the eastern portions of Oregon there. So that was a lot of graphics for me to tell you these 3 sentences. And we're already done. Here's what we're looking at for the next, for this coming fire season. in Washington, we've seen, above average rain. We've seen above average snow, mostly average temperatures. All we can say is we're going to see near average fire season in terms of total number of fires. If you wanted to hold a gun to my head, I'd say Western Columbia Basin, the East Slopes, Yakima Valley. And that would be because of the ample grass crop they had from last year and the dry and warm conditions they've had there over the last, I think it's 110 days since they've had a quarter inch of rain or something. So they've had some pretty unusually dry conditions even for the winter. Climate prediction models are indicating an early start to summer. This could force us into hot and dry conditions a lot earlier than usual. And, I point out that we thought in 2017 things were going to shape up to be pretty lackluster, and it changed for the worst pretty quickly when that kind of upper level pattern changed. So be cognizant, right? Don't let your guard down when we say that an average fire season is expected, because things can change on dramatic timescales, short range timescales. And then, I know that the majority of Nevada is already highlighted as at risk for above average fire potential by predictive services. I would imagine that there would be a chance for Oregon to make that list as we enter fire season as well. But it seems to be there's a high chance of Oregon experiencing an above average fire season. When we consider the amount of snow that they've had, the slightly above average temperatures, and the amount of rain that they've had, right? The driest on record since 2014, snowpack is about 50% of normal. All signs point towards an above average fire season for them. And, know that this, with the Northwest, they share resources. So, if you're in Washington, this is going to challenge resource availability as Washington comes into fire season. This is going to displace a lot of the Washington folks that are on incident management teams that deploy to fires south of here. And, I offer a caveat that all of this, of course, depends on ignition sources, right? If we don't have lightning ignitions in Southern Oregon, does that, will we end up seeing a severe fire season? If we do proactive burn bans, if we're putting out good fire danger messaging, will we see less frequent human ignitions? So a lot of factors can go into these outlooks, and it makes it kind of hard to produce them. But know that based on the climatology and the past weather of this year, I feel confident in saying Washington at average and Oregon above average in fire occurrence. So, thank you for listening. Are there any questions at all? I know there's some cool people on this phone.
Hey, Doc, this is Carrie, and normally I would jump in and say, oh, thanks for that great talk, but I don't know that I can do that, especially for Oregon. I'm not sure we're thanking you for that. But no, seriously, Thank you for coming on today and talking to us about, the outlook for the fire season. Does anybody have a question? We have Josh on the line for another half an hour if we want to keep him. Now's a great opportunity.
I have to drive from Seattle to, no.
Now's a great opportunity to ask him your questions that you have. So it sounds like, and I just gave a talk saying, about 68-70% of our ignitions are human caused in Oregon, and and we're extending our fire season, and it seems like probably one of the key things to do is work on our messaging towards getting people to stop starting fires.
Right. Yeah. I think, DNR is probably doing, I think, we're doing a lot of good now. We're taking a more regionalized perspective on how we set burn bans. Traditionally, we kind of set them from this east side, west side burn bans. And I don't think that was kind of as effective to issue them from this like omnipotent perspective. So we've started, we've relaxed that, and we're, doing fire danger and burn bans at a more regional perspective. And there's 6 regions in Washington. So I think that, makes it more local, feels more local. It, they don't have this blanket burn ban over them from July 1st through October 1st.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that the messaging is going to be more local and disseminated quicker when we do it that way. So yeah, I think that we're going to see people, heeding notice or whatever of burn bans and fire danger a lot better this year.
Well, maybe especially after last fire season, I know in Oregon with the Columbia River Gorge fire that we really got a lot of, folks' attention that live, in Portland and around the areas, and the Chetco Bar fire and various other fires. I feel like we have the attention. So that messaging at the regional level, I think, will be really helpful. I do have a question in from an audience member that says, how can the public help besides not starting fires?
Don't recreate. No.
Oh, no.
Yeah, right. No, I know that's a terrible thing to say. You say besides not starting fires? Is that the question?
Right. Yeah. So how can the public help?
Well, I think, of course, there's the potential for more and more WUI communities to become FireWise certified. I don't know if it's a certification, but DNR gets a lot of money to administer FireWise grants for communities, HOAs that are in the wildland urban interface area. So there's the potential there for homeowners to mitigate fire severity on their own property and the property adjacent to them. There's just increasing awareness and being patient with agencies like ODF and I think it's IDL and DNR when we're out there fighting fires. I know there was a story years ago, right, of going into Okanagan County, a fiercely independent community, and a DNR firefighter shows up with a shotgun in his face, by a local landowner. Basically saying, get off my property, I'll take care of it. Now that we've seen these 2014 and 2015 extreme fire seasons, we're getting out there more, we're interacting with the public more, and they've instilled way more trust in us than ever before. And, it's just been a great relationship. So continuing to encourage that relationship, a relationship of open communication and trust, attending public meetings for all the type 2s and type 1 fires that are out there, just being involved, being part of it, part of the solution, part of the effort, and not just being the naysayer, in the background, I guess.
Right. I like your points about, absolutely. I like your points on the FireWise too, working towards efforts towards becoming fire adapted communities. I'm kind of the spark plug in my neighborhood for the FireWise, and I am constantly sending out a reasonable amount of times my neighbors information about fire and smoke and, we're in a red flag warning, don't burn, things like that. And so I think the more people that we get into, and it's not a certification, but it's a designation, and folks have to work towards, they have to meet certain criteria to get that designation as FireWise. So that is a really great way to message and how the public can help. We do have, somebody's raising their hand, and I haven't done this before, but I'm going to unmute this participant, and she's going to ask you her question. So let's see here. Okay, Becky, you've been question. Okay, you've been unmuted.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Oh,
yeah, hey, I went ahead and sent it, but, down here in Oregon, we've had quite a bit of lightning, at least through Douglas County, the last couple of months, and I was just wondering if you think that's going to kind of continue throughout the season, if we're going to have a big lightning year, so possibly a lot of starts that way.
Right. That's kind of hard to say, right? The nature of lightning is kind of, it's random, and it depends on instability and the amount of water in the air and all that. I am surprised the amount of lightning that we've had in Washington already this year. It caught me off guard just this weekend. And seeing 300 lightning strikes, I think, over the weekend. So, I don't know what kind of story that tells, whether or not that lightning is dry type or wet, associated with dry or wet thunderstorms. It's kind of hard to gauge, this far out. And then, of course, how efficient is that lightning at starting a fire, right? We had 300 strikes and lightning over the weekend, but our fuels are in green up. And a lot of those storms came with, 0.4 of an inch of rain. So, will those actually start a fire? Probably not. And then there's the even more tricky scenario, right, of when, lightning strikes a tree or something and then it skunks around for a month and reemerges during hotter, drier conditions. So lightning is a beast. It's hard to predict. And I think, we do a good job in the couple days out window, but knowing about lightning, a couple months out is extremely difficult.
Right,
that does not answer your question. I'm basically saying, I should have just said, I don't know.
But it actually kind of does, because the first storm that came through produced four little fires, that the FPA caught right away, luckily. And so, yeah, it's telling me if it's as dry out there as it is right now, and it's going to be drier this summer, it's probably going to get worse, especially if we get the lightning.
Right.
So,
for sure. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
thanks.
You could definitely say that. Yeah.
Okay, Becky, I'm going to go ahead and mute you again. Go ahead and raise your hand if you think of something else to ask. Anybody else for Josh? Going once? Just kidding. Well, Josh, thank you. I know you've been super busy, and you were just on, that meeting or webinar this morning. So I thank you for joining us and talking to us. And I also want to thank the folks who joined in, who took time out of their busy schedules to listen. I appreciate that. And, if you have an interesting idea for a webinar, please don't hesitate to get a hold of us. We're always looking for new things to report on, or for that matter, if you have an interesting idea for a field tour or other things, don't hesitate to contact us. So it doesn't look like there's any other questions coming in. I think you've scared the bejesus out of everybody, and nobody wants to say anything.
Hey, I did say Washington's looking pretty good.
Right,
so.
You did. I guess I'm in Oregon, so I am Oregon-centric. But yes, Washington is looking okay, and Oregon and other places around the West not so good. But
well, I should say that, as kind of a parting thought, all of this changes. It can change very quickly, and I want you all to, pay attention to your local weather forecast offices, who all have incredible fire weather program leaders. And then you have, wonderful meteorologists, Eric and John at the GAC level, that are there for you. They're there to forecast fire danger and fire weather for you. So use and abuse us as a collective. We are here to serve you all. So
that's awesome. Thank you so much, Josh. And I will actually see you in Missoula at the Fire Continuum Conference. I'll look for your talk. Okay, great, everybody.
Okay.
Thanks again. And this will be archived and placed up on our YouTube and website probably by Friday. So, all right, have a good rest of your day.
All right, thanks.